Okay, so you've sent us a really compelling collection of material this time, all focused on uh, necrophobia,
Yeah, it's quite the topic.
definitely. So let's just dive right in. What exactly is this fear we're looking at based on these sources?
Well, the materials define it pretty clearly. Necrophobia isn't just, being a bit creeped out by death.
Sure.
It's a specific phobia, an irrational fear, really, of dead organisms' corpses, basically. But it also stretches to things associated with death.
Like what kind of things?
Coffins, tombstones, funerals, even cemeteries themselves.
Gotcha. And I saw mention of another term, cometrophobia.
Yeah, that popped up in one source, but apparently it just redirects back to necrophobia. Seems necrophobia is the main term.
Okay, so a very specific, focused fear. But it's not simply about avoiding something unpleasant, is it? One thing that really jumped out from the reading was this.
Well, this sort of tension.
You mean the fascination versus objectification thing?
Exactly. It's like we're drawn to death and also push it away, maybe even objectify it. What's that about? It seems to tap into something really fundamental about being human, doesn't it? Death is this huge certainty, but also this profound unknown.
Right, the ultimate paradox.
And that paradox probably sparks a whole range of psychological stuff. Maybe we're driven to try and understand this thing we all face.
While at the same time needing to distance ourselves from how uncomfortable it is.
Precisely. Maybe even making it into an object makes it feel less immediate, less threatening.
That makes a lot of sense, trying to get a grip on something so massive.
Yeah.
So let's talk triggers. What can actually set off this intense fear in someone?
The sources suggest several rights. One big one seems to be direct traumatic
Like
experiences.
witnessing a death.
Yeah, exactly. Seeing someone close die or a pet, or even just stumbling upon a dead body unexpectedly. Those kinds of really intense personal moments can forge a strong link between fear and death.
I can see that. A shock like that could absolutely leave a mark.
Right.
But it's not just about personal trauma, right? There's also what we pick up from others.
Definitely. Learned responses are mentioned. Phobias can develop within families or even, culturally.
How so?
Well, if a child sees a parent or someone important showing extreme fear or anxiety around funerals or talking about death, that fear can be sort of absorbed, learned unintentionally.
Huh. Like catching an emotion almost.
Mm.
Interesting. What about biology? Do our genes get a look in here?
There's a suggestion of a potential genetic link, not like a specific necrophobia gene, but
Really?
maybe.
A general tendency towards anxiety.
Exactly. Some people might just be wired to be more anxious overall, making them maybe more susceptible to developing specific phobias, and necrophobia could be one of them.
Okay. And then there's the modern world. We see so much stuff, especially in media. Horror movies, for instance. They often center on death. Do they play a part?
Oh, for sure. Media, especially horror, is mentioned. Some researchers point out our brains are kind of primed to look for threats, and horror plays on that brilliantly to create excitement.
Right, the thrill factor.
But for certain people, that constant barrage of scary images of death and dead things could potentially feed into or even worsen anxieties they already have.
So entertainment for one person might actually be unsettling for another. And lastly, the sources brought up stress. How does that fit in?
Yes, significant or ongoing stress seems to be another piece of the puzzle. It can apparently trigger what the sources call defensive and escaping behavior.
Meaning,
Meaning, if someone's already vulnerable, major stress might push them towards developing or worsening a fear connected to death or things related to it.
okay, so we've got trauma, learning, maybe genetics, media, stress, quite a few potential starting points. But what does it feel like? What are the actual symptoms someone with necrophobia might experience?
They seem pretty wide-ranging, hitting both the body and the mind.
Yeah.
Physically, the list includes things like dizziness, feeling lightheaded,
Okay.
sweaty palms, heart racing, tingling sensations, sweating a lot, chest pain or tightness, feeling hot, then cold, trembling, shaping, even numbness sometimes. It sounds really physically distressing.
Yeah, that's a picture of a very intense physical reaction.
Yeah.
What about psychologically? What's happening inside their head?
Psychologically, it sounds overwhelming. Intense dread, serious discomfort when faced with anything death-related.
Like an inability to cope in that moment.
Yeah, and maybe feeling like they're losing control or feeling detached from themselves, from their own body. Also, a fear of dying themselves often comes up, and finding it hard to tell the fear from reality. And just this powerful, urgent need to get away, to avoid any situation that triggers the phobia.
It sounds genuinely debilitating. Now, looking back, this fear isn't exactly new, is it? The sources suggest it has deep historical roots.
Oh, absolutely. Its origins trace way back into ancient Greek culture and maybe even earlier, like the Neolithic period. What's really fascinating is this ancient belief that the dead could, well, rise.
Undead, like neither properly alive nor properly dead.
Precisely that.
Yeah.
And the key thing was the belief that these undead could actually pose a danger to the living.
That's the stuff of ancient nightmares.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just a story they told, right? They actually did things because of this fear.
They absolutely did. Archaeology gives us proof. There are finds, lots of them, where bodies from that time were buried with heavy stones or bits of pottery, amphora fragments placed right on top of them.
To physically hold them down.
Exactly. It seems like a pretty clear attempt to literally prevent the body from getting back up. It really shows how tangible that fear was.
That's incredible, the level of anxiety that must have driven that.
Yeah.
And this fear of the restless dead, it was tied into their ideas about the soul.
Yes, the materials link it strongly to the ancient Greek idea of the body and soul separating at death.
Okay.
The thinking was the physical body stops, but the soul carries on somewhere else. But then came the fear. What if the soul came back? Or what if some other, maybe malevolent spirit decided to move into the empty body?
Leading to that dreaded undead state. Wow.
So it wasn't just being afraid of death itself, but afraid of what might come back. That's a pretty primal fear.
It really is. So bringing it forward to today, if someone is grappling with necrophobia, what help is available? Are there good treatments?
Thankfully, yes. Several effective approaches exist. Psychotherapy is a major one. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is common.
Right.
But the sources really emphasize exposure therapy as being particularly effective for this specific phobia.
Exposure therapy. That sounds intense. Facing the fear head on. How does that work?
Well, it's done very gradually and in a safe, controlled way, usually with a therapist guiding it. The idea is desensitization.
So starting small.
Exactly. Maybe beginning with just talking about death or looking at pictures, then slowly, carefully progressing towards things that cause more anxiety, perhaps visiting a cemetery or eventually even seeing a coffin, but always in a controlled therapeutic setting.
And the repetition helps lessen the fear over time.
That's the principle. Repeated exposure, managed carefully, helps to weaken that automatic fear response. It rewires the reaction, essentially.
Makes sense. A gradual reclaiming of control. I also saw medication mentioned.
Yes, medication can be used, often alongside therapy.
Right.
An interesting one brought up is D-cycloserine, which is actually an antibiotic.
An antibiotic for a phobia.
Yeah, apparently some research suggests it can help the brain with fear extinction, basically, making the process of unlearning the fear and exposure therapy potentially more effective.
That's fascinating. Who knew? And outside of professional therapy, are there things people can do themselves to cope?
Definitely. The sources list several self-help strategies. Things like relaxation techniques, meditation, yoga, deep breathing can really help manage the baseline anxiety.
Practical tools.
Yeah. And also simply talking about it. Sharing feelings with trusted friends or family, or connecting with others who get it, maybe through support groups. That shared experience and support can be really valuable.
Good point. Okay, so let's try and pull this together. Summing up our deep dive on necrophobia. We've seen it's this intense, irrational fear, not just of corpses, but things linked to death too.
Right, like coffins, funerals, cemeteries.
And it can stem from different places, trauma, learned behavior, maybe genetic predisposition, media exposure, even stress.
And the symptoms hit hard, both physically, racing heart, dizziness, sweating, and psychologically, with overwhelming fear, detachment, wanting to escape.
We also touched on its really old roots, going back to ancient times, tied up with beliefs about the undead rising.
Possibly linked to ideas about the soul separating from the body and the fear it could return or be replaced. The archaeological evidence of weighing down bodies really underscores that ancient fear.
It really does. And crucially, there are effective treatments available today. Psychotherapy, especially exposure therapy.
Which works by desensitization, seems to be highlighted as very effective. Plus, sometimes medication, like that interesting D-cycloserine example, and definitely self-help coping strategies.
Relaxation, talking, support groups, all important pieces.
Yeah, and thinking about that ancient fear again, the lengths they went to, physically pinning down the dead, it really brings home how powerful that anxiety was.
It connects the past and present in a really striking way.
Which kind of leads to a final thought for you, listening. When you consider that long history, that deep-seated fear of the undead, and then you look at our modern understanding of psychology, What does our current fascination with death, in horror films, true crime stories, all that stuff really say about how we relate to mortality and the unknown?
Hmm.
Is it possible those ancient fears are still echoing somewhere underneath, still subtly shaping our modern anxieties, even if we don't always realize it? Something to think about.